Welcome to this explainer. You know, Today we're going to tackle a pretty massive fundamental question. How exactly does nature pull off working in such perfect harmony? We're going to dive right into the fascinating science of ecology and really unpack how every single thing out there, living or non-living, is delicately interconnected. We'll break down our environment step by step and figure out how it all ticks. So imagine a family of magnificent, towering elephants. Except they aren't deep in some lush, protected jungle. Instead, they're wandering right next to a railway track and a blank billboard, dangerously close to human spaces. It really makes you wonder, right? Why are these highly intelligent giants wandering out of the forest and straight into human farms or villages in places like Odisha, Jharkhand, and West Bengal? What exactly is pushing them out of their natural homes? To understand this massive ripple effect, we've got a 5-part roadmap for today. 1. The disruption. 2. The building blocks. 3. Scaling up. 4. The butterfly effect. And finally, number 5, the web of life. Kicking things off with Section 1, the disruption, and what happens when habitats change. The crucial point to understand here is that when vegetation becomes scarce, or when habitats shrink because of human construction, like, building roads and large structures, animals literally have no choice. They are forced to leave their natural homes just to find basic food and water. Throw in shifting rainfall and temperature changes affecting the plants they rely on, plus drying water holes, and suddenly you've got elephants wandering into nearby farms looking for bananas or sugarcane. And that's where we get real-world conflict, crop damage, and serious danger for both the humans and the animals. This is exactly why wildlife ecologists have stepped in to mark out specific corridors connecting large forest areas, basically creating safe highways so these animals can travel without clashing with human settlements. Moving right along to Section 2, the building blocks, or the core components of nature. It's honestly fascinating how neatly we can split the entire natural world into two essential halves. On one side of the coin, you have the biotic players, the living, breathing things like fish, trees, birds, and grass. And then, on the flip side, you have the abiotic stage that they literally stand on, the non-living stuff like soil, water, air, temperature, and sunlight. Every single environment you can think of is basically just a mashup of these two interacting columns. And to put that into perspective, think about a sunny, dry forest compared to a wet, lush pond. They offer totally different physical conditions, but the fundamental ecological rules of biotic and abiotic interaction, they remain exactly the same. In a forest, it might be baking hot during the day and freezing at night, with rodents and birds navigating dry soil and air. But the pond, that's a completely different abiotic world of water, supporting biotic turtles, fish, and lotus plants. So you have vastly different environments, but the exact same basic rules of life applying to both. Which perfectly sets us up for a formal definition. A habitat is, quite simply, the specific place where an organism lives. It has to offer the essential conditions needed to survive. We're talking food, oxygen, shelter, and space. And here's the cool part. A habitat doesn't actually have to be as massive as a whole forest. Something as small as a single piece of tree bark can be a habitat. It can provide a perfectly tailored microenvironment where an organism thrives in total harmony with its surroundings. All right, let's zoom out a bit for Section 3, scaling up to populations and communities. Think about it. When you look at a pond, you almost never see just one lonely fish, right? You see a whole school of them darting around. Well, in ecology, that is a population. It's a group of the exact same type of organisms living together in a specific habitat at a specific time. If you walk out into a garden, mark off a tiny 1 by 1 meter square, and count, say, 20 of the exact same type of plant inside it, boom, you've just measured a population. But what do you think would happen if a habitat only had one type of living organism in it? Well, if everything was exactly the same, they'd all have the exact same requirements for food, water, and space. That would lead to absolute chaos, massive competition, and a total scarcity of resources. And that is exactly why diverse communities are so incredibly vital. A community is essentially a collection of totally different populations sharing the same space. Because they are different, they use resources differently, which is the magic trick that allows them to coexist and depend on each other without completely exhausting their habitat. Now for one of the coolest concepts, Section 4, the butterfly effect and nature's invisible connections. So we have to ask, does every single organism in a community actually matter? Let's put on our ecological detective hats for a second and look at a bustling pond to solve a pretty fantastic mystery. Researchers posed a crazy question. How do fish living entirely underwater affect the amount of seeds produced by flowers growing way up on the dry land. It sounds impossible, right? Like they don't even touch each other. Let's trace the clues. Okay, here is the incredible step-by-step chain reaction. Step 1. Ponds that are packed with fish mean those fish are eating a huge amount of dragonfly larvae right there in the water. Step 2, because all those larvae are getting eaten, way fewer adult dragonflies actually survive to fly around. Now, adult dragonflies happen to love eating bees, flies, and butterflies. So fewer dragonflies means fewer predators hunting the local pollinators. Which brings us to step 3. With fewer dragonflies swooping around, way more bees and butterflies survive to flutter over and pollinate the flowers on the shore. And more pollination means more seeds. It's wild. This step-by-step sequence absolutely proves that adding or removing just a single predator, like a fish, indirectly dictates exactly how many seeds a plant up on the shore is going to produce. Just pause and think about the profound implications of that for a second. Biotic and abiotic components are constantly interacting in this intricate dance. If you disrupt one single thread, you literally disrupt them all. Imagine if human actions, like severe overfishing, removed all the fish from that specific pond. Suddenly, the dragonfly larva population would boom. The adult dragonflies would practically wipe out the local bees, and those shore flowers, they'd completely stop producing seeds. The entire balance of the ecosystem is just incredibly delicate. Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, the web of life, and figuring out who eats whom. To really map out exactly how these dependencies work, we've got to look at the primary driver of interaction in nature, which is, of course, food. Literally, every organism falls into a specific feeding category. First up, we have the autotrophs, or producers. These are the incredible plants out there making their very own food by harnessing abiotic components like sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. Then we have the heterotrophs, or consumers, which just can't make their own food. This is a hugely diverse group that includes the herbivores eating only plants, the carnivores eating only animals, and the omnivores chowing down on both. When we start organizing who actually eats whom, we end up building this sort of pyramid of trophic levels. Down at the wide, supportive base, the first trophic level is totally packed with producers, like green plants. Right above them sit the herbivores, your deer and hares. Then come the small carnivores, like frogs, occupying the third level. And finally, sitting at the very top level, we have the large apex carnivores, like tigers and vultures. What's really key to notice here is how energy transfers upward. You need a massive, wide base of plants to support just a much smaller select number of large predators at the very top. If we go back to treating an ecosystem like a crime board tracking suspects, a basic food chain shows us exactly who eats whom in a straight, linear sequence. For example, out in a grassland, the grass is eaten by the grasshopper gets eaten by the frog gets snapped up by the snake, and then the snake is eventually scooped up by an eagle. It is a very direct, straightforward sequence of energy transfer. But as we all know, nature is rarely ever just a simple straight line. These individual chains interlink and overlap constantly. Sure, a frog might be eaten by a snake, but it could just as easily be eaten by a large wading bird. A hare might be hunted by a fox, but also by an owl or a leopard. All these individual chains weave together into a massive, tangled food web, proving once again that absolutely everything is connected. Disrupting even one tiny thread sends vibrations throughout the entire web. And that brings us to the end of this explainer. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative question to ponder. Can the Earth thrive without humans? And can humans survive without the Earth? When we look closely at the intricate, perfectly balanced interactions of nature that we've covered today, the answer becomes incredibly clear. We are just one small, deeply dependent part of this vast, beautiful harmony. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep observing those amazing webs of life right in your own backyard.